Hello, today we're going to be going over MIG welding safety and setup. So as far as MIG welding safety goes, a lot of the same safety applies from our stick welding. You need to be wearing glasses, you need to keep these on at all times. Welding helmet with a shade 9, shade 10, shade 11, somewhere in there. I find that a shade 9 works a little bit better for MIG welding. You can see what you're doing a little bit more. You need to have pants on, you need to have a long sleeve shirt, leather jacket, something along those lines. It has to be non-synthetic, so remember cotton, denim, or wool. Closed-toed shoes. I'd recommend earplugs to keep hot sparks out of your ears. A welding cap and welding gloves with gauntlets on them. No synthetic welding gloves. Now we need to go ahead and set our gas. So the typical gas pressure you want to use when MIG welding inside without any wind or anything was roughly between 15 and 20 CFH, so cubic feet per hour of flow of gas. To do that, I'm going to pick you guys up and flip you around in our welding shop here. If you walk into the shop and come over right in here, we have 3 tanks with a regulator on it right here. It's not a flow meter. This is a regulator. It regulates how much gas is going through there. So the best way to set this is slowly open the tank. Go ahead and open it all the way. So what I find is the easiest way to set your gases is to come over to the machine here, or you can go ahead and turn on the machine. And then on the back side of our wire feeder suitcase, there's also an on-off switch, and I'm going to turn that, I believe, down turns the switch on, up turns it off. And then what I'll do is on the front of the machine right here, there's 2 little toggle switches. The one on the left is the trigger hold, so we're never going to use that one. But the one on the right is a wire feed. So if you push it up, if you see this right here, it's going to jog my wire out. If I push it down, if you listen, it'll purge the gas into the system. So I think that's a good thing to do every time before you start welding for the first time for that day, because it purges all the air out of the system. And rather than getting porosity for the first inch, you'll have some 75-25 argon CO2, like what you want. So what you're going to want to do, looking at the regulator on the wall here, is right now I've cranked this up so it's at 200 psi, which is way, 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 way too much for what we're doing. So I'm going to back out the T handle on here, and I would always check this at the beginning of the day. And where you want the pressure to be at is the second black line up. And to get this pressure to drop, I'm going to go back over to my welder. I'm going to push that purge button for a minute, let it purge the gas out of the system, and then I'll come back over here and double check it. Now with the purge button pressed, I have it adjusted to my second black line right here. And you want to push the purge button as you adjust this, because that's going to be your working pressure. So if you just adjust this, it's going to drop from there when you start actually using the gas. So now that we have our gas set, we need to know what can we weld with the MIG welder. So with the right setup, MIG welder is a pretty flexible piece of equipment. So the way ours are set up right now, you can weld steel, and that's it, mild steel. But you can buy a spool gun for your machine, and that allows you to weld aluminum. And you can also change out the wire on just a regular welder without the spool gun on it. And you can put stainless wire in there if you want to weld stainless steel. As we're talking about steel wire that you can use on a MIG welder, there's 2 main different types that you can use. So I'm going to zoom you down here. The first one is called dual shield. If you look right here, that says 0.045. So that tells you the diameter of the wire. So typically dual shield is 0.045. And I also write on these 0.045 dual shield, so it's easy to tell. And if you look at it this way, you see how silver that is? All dual shield will have a silver coating on it like that. And what dual shield is it has a shielding gas on the inside of the wire, and when that burns, you're getting the shielding from that, and you're also getting the shielding from the C25, the 25% CO2, 75% argon that's shielding it as well. Whereas a regular MIG wire will have a copper color to it like this. And if you look at the label on here, it's going to say right here, ER70S-6. ER70S6. This is about the most common MIG wire you can find. It's also going to tell you the diameter of the wire right at the top here, 0.035. So this is 035 ER70S6. And the three common ER70S6 wires are 023 or 024, 030, 0.030, and 0.035. 0.030 is a very common well-rounded wire that can be used from any thickness. So it'll go down to about sheet metal thickness, and it'll go up to about 5/16. Now we're back over at the machine here. And one thing we need to make sure is that our machine number matches our wire suitcase feed number. So both these are 3. The next thing we're going to do to set this machine up is we are going to take the electrode holder out of the positive, make sure our ground is in the negative position, and then right next to the machine here, there should be a dense plug that says wire feed on it. And make sure that wire feed goes to the suitcase that you think it does. You're just going to plug that in, twist it, get it nice and snug. We're going to flip the front cover open here. We're going to switch it from stick up to MIG. Turn the arc control to 0. Turn the VA control up to panel. We'll go ahead and shut that. You can flip the machine on. On the back side of the suitcase here for your wire feeder, there's a switch. Flip that down. That turns the suitcase on. And then your gun, when you pull the trigger, it should feed wire and purge gas. The one last thing that I like to do, actually a couple last things that I like to do before I start is I like to unscrew my nozzle, and you'll see the nozzle and the tip will come out together. So if you take a pair of welding pliers, some people call these welding helpers, you can push on the tip. You might have to spin it around a little bit, see if you can get that out of there. So there, we got it out. This is what your tip looks like. And this one's pretty used up, so I'm going to grab a new tip. And then also the other thing I like to check is on my nozzle. You see all those holes in the back of there? You want all those holes to be clear, and you don't want any splatter inside of here. If you have splatter, just take your whelpers and put them inside the nozzle like that and give it a spin. I'll also sometimes close my whelpers and then open them like that and spin it like that and get all that stuff out of there, because any debris in there is going to prevent the gas from flowing like it's supposed to. Then once you're done, go ahead and install the nozzle and the tip back on the MIG gun. Be really, really careful not to cross thread the nozzle onto the gun. So here I have my brand new tip. All that I'm going to do is take my wire, slide the tip onto the wire like that until it comes all the way down. And then when you put the nozzle on, you have to be careful that your wire doesn't go through one of those holes that we just cleaned out. Then you just thread it on. And that doesn't need to be super tight, just snug. And then we have all this extra wire on coming out of our gun. And if you look at these whelpers, on one side the wire cutters sit flush, and on the other side they kind of sit in a little bit. So if you take this side of the pliers, set that down on your nozzle, just like that, and then cut your wire off. That'll set your wire stick out distance. That's the distance that you want to use. Also, after you've been welding for a little bit, you let off the trigger, you're going to have a little ball that builds up on the end of this. You should take your whelpers every time you're done, you let off the trigger and trim that wire. That'll make your arc start a lot easier and run a lot smoother for those first couple seconds where it'll usually kind of sputter. Now that I have my tip cleaned, my nozzle's cleaned out, what I'm going to do before I start welding is I'm going to come over to the two switches on the front of the machine right here. And this right switch says jog/purge. So if I push the switch up, it'll jog the drive wheels and it'll push some wire out. If I push it down, it'll purge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this lever down for about 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what that does is that purges all the gas from the atmosphere out of this line that may have got in there as it was just sitting, because the gas will naturally flow out. So we flipped ourselves around here. I have my ventilation under my head, just like we did when we were stick welding, because I don't want to breathe all that, the stuff that's coming off of this, all the gas and stuff. I don't want to breathe that. One thing to keep in mind too, before you start welding, on your MIG welder, it's got a lead, and inside of this lead, there's a liner. And in order for the wire to be able to flow out to the end of your MIG gun here, this lead can't have any tight bends in it. So if you look behind yourself, if your MIG weld lead has any tight bends, put a big loop in there rather than a small tight bend. That'll make it be able to feed a lot smoother. I've got my material, it might be kind of hard to see, polished up, nice and shiny bright. That way I'm not trying to weld through mill scale. I've got my ground clamp hooked up to my table here. I just kind of put it on the back so it's tucked out of the way. Now I've got to decide what welding motion I want to use. And also what angle I want to weld at. So when I'm welding flat, I try and keep my torch back and forth at 90 degrees. And then I rock it back this way, roughly about 30 degrees or so. And I just keep that consistent as I'm moving. Okay, and that's going to change. Say, if I were doing this as a T-weld, I'm going to aim my gun straight into the corner of the joint with a 30-degree back angle. So typically, the rule of thumb is when you're welding flat, if you have two joints like this, you aim perfectly square into the corner with a 30-degree drag or push angle on it. If you're doing a lap weld, same thing. You're going to aim into the corner of the weld. I'm going to take you guys over to the whiteboard and draw on some of the oscillations that work really well for MIG welding. But first, I'm going to flip you around and show you how to shut everything down on here. So when you're done with your machine, make sure to turn off the welder, and then also on the back side of the wire feeder, make sure to flip that switch up so that this suitcase is turned off also. And then the last thing we need to do is go over and shut our gas off. So to shut the gas off, all that we're going to do is come to the cylinder that is attached to this braided line that goes to our regulator, and we're just going to shut that cylinder just like that. So what it comes down to is there's basically three different types of manipulations for the MIG welder that work really well. You want to try and trace the front of the puddle. You never want to go out of the puddle, but the further forward you can get in the puddle, the better. That helps with penetration. So the first manipulation looks like this. It's a series of triangles. So as you go forward, that gets you to the front of the puddle. Then when you come back, that just allows you to add more material. So that's the first one. The second one that works pretty well is a series of like C's or half moons. So it looks kind of something like this. I'm just kind of pausing on the edges of the weld here. Oh, that's number 2. And then the third one is the one that I use most often. And that's a bunch of almost like cursive E's. So we have an E and another E. And I like that one the most because, I don't know, some of these I feel like I get kind of jerky and not very steady. Whereas that one, it's kind of one fluid motion all the way down your plate. So experiment with all three of these, see what works best for you, because what works for me might not work very well for you, and so on. The last thing I want to share with you guys is the floor model MIG welder that we have in the back of the shop. It looks similar but slightly different than the welders I was just demoing. So on here, we also have a ground clamp, and I like to hook that on the bottom of the table. I put a tab under there just to kind of tuck it out of the way for you. It has a similar looking MIG gun, a little bit smaller than the Bernards that we have in the weld shop. This nozzle doesn't thread off. You can just pull it off, and it gets gummed up also. And then also these tips, rather than them just pulling off, they thread off. So you'll have to spin that to get the tip to come off. To set the gas on this machine, all that you'll do is turn the power on the front of the machine. On the bottle, you're going to slowly crack the bottle open. And what you'll see is on this gauge, you'll have the tank pressure. The gauge that's closer to the tank is always your tank pressure. The gauge that's further away is your flow meter. So it's in cubic feet per hour. So it's 15 to 20 CFH is what we're looking for. And to set that, all that you're going to do is pull the trigger on the gun, and then you can adjust it to 15 to 20 CFH. And then when you're done, make sure to shut the tank off, coil up your leads on here, just onto the front handle of the machine, and put it away. As far as setting wire speed and also voltage, we have a chart on the side of this machine, and then on our welders in the welding shop, we have a chart on the top of the machine. And this chart isn't an end-all be-all chart. This just gives you a rough starting spot. So don't be afraid to adjust from where this chart tells you. So this reads from left to right and then top down. So what material are you welding on? You're welding on steel, stainless, aluminum. So we're welding on steel, so that narrows it down to these two sections. So we're going to move over. So are we welding flux core, solid, and this is solid also. So we aren't welding flux core right now, and we are using ER70S6. So we're going to stick with those. We're going to go over again. We aren't using 100% CO2. We are using 75-25. So that narrows us down to this right here. We'll move over one more time. What's our wire diameter? We are using 0.35 on this machine. And then the last thing you have to do is you have to look at your metal thickness at the top here, and then you're going to slide over and figure out where these meet. So I'm welding 1/8" material today. So it says I need to set my machine to 17.4 on my voltage and then 230 on the wire speed. And that seems to be a relatively good setting. You'll have to adjust it some. Another great way to set the machine, if you're getting a lot of crackling, it's not sounding quite like you want, a bunch of splatter, is you can weld, get your machine running. You could say set it to 17 volts or 17.5 volts. And you can, because I know the wire speed's a little bit trickier to set on the machines in the welding shop. So you just set your voltage and then start welding and have your buddy start turning up the wire speed. And then once it starts to sound good and crisp, have them pay attention to where that is and keep turning it, and it'll start to sound poppy again. And then you can turn it back to where it sounded crisp and really smooth, kind of like bacon frying. That's the sound that you're looking for. Also, as you're MIG welding, you're going to find that your nozzle gets clogged up. It's going to get lots of splatter in there. We do have some Weldco clean gel, or clean green is what they're calling it, nozzle dip weld splatter preventer. And the way this works is you have to run a pretty good bead, run a 6-inch bead, get that nozzle nice and hot, and then you're just going to take the top off and dunk it in the nozzle gel just real quick. It only has to go in about a 1/2 inch or maybe 3/4 of an inch, not very far, and that'll coat the nozzle to help prevent the buildup of that splatter. We also have anti-splatter spray. So if you're going to weld in an area you don't want the splatter to build up, you want it to come off really easy, you can put this anti-splatter spray on, do your weld, and then all your splatter in theory should just wipe off really super easy.